So once again, welcome everybody. What I'm gonna do in this third and final session is hop back into what I didn't finish from last session about the polyvagal nerves. And then we're going to segue into the topic of this presentation, which is kind of trying to use some of the information we've gained this weekend to start thinking about how it connects with our Orthodox faith. And I'll put a link to that running list of resources once again that I've been using. You'll see that for this session, there's not any resources listed, and that's because I'm not really quoting anything. It's going to be a bit more of a discussion once we get to that second part. But all the other resources that I've been talking about should be there for you. And I'll share my screen. Here's where we were before lunch. Talking about all things polyvagal. We had just finished kind of learning where exactly the polyvagus system is in the body, how it connects to a lot of our internal organs and systems. And remember that the polyvagal nerve is related to this parasympathetic nervous system, the part of the autonomic nervous system that's trying to bring a sense of calm. It's trying to bring the body to a state of rest, make the body able to rest. Whereas the sympathetic nervous system is trying to activate, engage the body to face a threat, to face stress, to move towards things we need like food. And that these two parts of the nervous system are always kind of playing tug of war in a healthy way to get us what we need, bring our bodies, keep our bodies in a state of equilibrium and homeostasis. What can happen? Let's say we are raised in an environment where there's chronic stress, maybe an environment that we would characterize as characterized by what's called complex trauma. And I mentioned this last session. That's the kind of trauma where it's not just one single event that we can point to. It's a sort of chronic environment of micro traumas, chronic stress, instability. So if we're in an environment like that for too long, or we experience a trauma that, maybe even just a single trauma that affects us on a very deep level, what can happen is our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems get over or underactivated. They become what's called dysregulated. That's a term, dysregulated, meaning they stop functioning in the normal balanced way that they're supposed to. And this tug of war between parasympathetic and sympathetic branches of the nervous system, it stops being a tug of war that brings equilibrium, and it starts to get imbalanced. Maybe the sympathetic nervous system becomes sort of stronger and overpowering, or the parasympathetic nervous system becomes stronger or overpowering, or both of them kind of become prone to sort of intense bursts and spikes rather than a sort of gentle equilibrium. One way to think about this is a muscle. I don't have a lot of muscles in my arms, at least. But one thing I know about muscles is if you try to flex your biceps, you can try right now if you would like. If you flex your biceps, I can Press, it's kind of hard. It's kind of flexed. I can't flex my bicep too much because there's not much there. But but it's hard because I'm flexing it. Now, if I try to hold my flex for the rest of the talk, what's going to start happening? Well, I can already feel it because I'm very weak. My arm's going to start to shake. My muscle is going to start to become fatigued. It already is. I don't even have a weight or anything. But over time, I have to stop. It's hurting. Over time, what would happen is that that muscle would actually start to break down, because in order for muscles to grow stronger, they have to um, move through states of stress followed by states of relax or calm. So states when the muscle is engaged followed by recovery time. And I run. That's my sport of choice. And you have to. What happens when you run is you actually stressing the muscles and breaking them down a little bit. And then after you run, when you're stretching, when you have a rest day, those muscles build back up and they become stronger than they were before. And that's how you become a better runner. That's how your legs get stronger. That's how your respiratory system adapts to be able to run longer distances or faster. But when our bodies are constantly under stress, that is, if I tried to run 3 hours every day, if I tried to hold my arm in flex, that muscle would be unable to relax, and it would, because it's not getting any recovery, it would start to break down or atrophy. And something similar happens in our nervous systems when we're in environments that are chronically stressful or um, uh, chronically sort of trauma inducing. Our trauma responses are extreme forms of stress responses. Um, so when we're in environments for too long, our nervous systems become taxed, they become overworked, and they become imbalanced. Some parts of the nervous system becomes overactive, other parts become underactive, because the overactive parts are sort of taking control all the time. And because of all of this, certain our nerves, the way they function in the body sort of starts to break down. They start to atrophy or become like a lack of tone in them, just like a muscle. And over time, I mean over years, over our growing up years, over decades of our adult lives, this just eventually kind of becomes the way that we function, and we may not even notice we may not even notice the dysregulation within us, because it tends to be quite subtle. And it's not until maybe we have a really serious breakdown or rupture event where our coping mechanisms are overwhelmed, that we start to realize, oh, I actually, it's not just this crisis that is overwhelming me. It's the fact that my coping mechanisms all along have been really dysregulated for a long time. So this chart that I've had up for a while now, maybe you've read it all while I was talking. In the middle, I wanna start with the in the middle, not the right toolbar, with this black line, this black U shape. I like to call this. I do an exercise with my clients, usually in the first or second session, if they're doing work around trauma recovery, that I call the polyvagal mapping exercise. And what I do is I tell them to put this diagram on their phone, take a screenshot, whatever, print it out on a piece of paper if you're more analog, and keep it with you, keep it on your person. And a few times throughout your week, it can be when you're stressed out, it can be when you're triggered, or it can just be in some kind of mundane moment, like when you're waiting in line or waiting in the car for someone or whatever. Take this chart out and ask yourself, where on this line are you? Where on this line are you? So what is this line a map through? Well, it's a map or a journey through stress responses. As human beings, our nervous systems are wired to get to this green zone, this green zone. This is called the ventral vagal state because of that part of the vagal system that runs alongside the heart. And it's a state when we are able to, first of all, when we are safe and when we're able to recognize and feel safe. We often in this state feel calm, settled, we feel grounded, we feel curious, compassionate, mindfully aware. So last session when I started by asking us to think of a place where we feel hopeful, connected, safe, and then we noted how that made us feel in our body, just imagining being in that place. Probably what most of us were experiencing, those sensations most of us were experiencing, is our green. So you were feeling a little slice of the green state. And you can see on the right, this is a state where the parasympathetic nervous system is sort of in control, but in equilibrium with the sympathetic. So it's not overpowering the sympathetic nervous system. I guess they're both kind of functioning in tandem with each other, but we associate this with the parasympathetic nervous system because it's a state of calm, and that's sort of the function of the parasympathetic system. What's happening in your body when we're in this state, you can see on the right-hand side in the green, we are digesting our food, our intestines are moving, our immunity to diseases tends to be higher. We are more able to rest and recuperate, not feeling like jittery, like we gotta be fidgeting or walking around. It's a good place for our bodies to be in. This is the I forgot what the nickname is. Rest and digest. But this is a good state to be in. Now, we're not in this state permanently, and the goal of trauma recovery is not to always be in the green, because we're going to learn now about the yellow and the red. And I want to say right out of the gate, these are not bad states. Okay, it's not like we always need to be in the green. What's supposed to happen, and when the nervous system is functioning in a healthy and balanced way, we cycle in and out of various shades of these green, yellow, and red throughout the day in response to normal stressors, because there's always going to be stressors. And so we're cycling in and out. We're not getting stuck. We're not shooting into, let's say, the fight or flight mode out of nowhere in response to some totally harmless trigger. We're just cycling naturally in and out, and we're able to come back to the green when we can find a place of calm, when we can get our workout in, when we can get a good night's sleep. We're able to get ourselves back to the green. So what happens when we face a stressor, whether it's an external stressor like a crabby boss, someone trying to mug us on the street, or an internal stressor like a intrusive memory of a feeling of shame from a previous trauma experience, is that our body starts to mobilize and do the things that it senses we need to do in order to stay safe. So I asked you in the last session, what happens when you picture being in a place that has caused you discomfort or a sense of disconnection? I asked you earlier than that, earlier in the session, what happens when you imagine standing over a cliff and looking down? Odds are simply imagining those situations cause certain things in your body to happen. I remember with the heights example, someone said, their heart was beating, they had butterflies in their stomach. That is a sign that you're entering the fight or flight state. And this is where the sympathetic nervous system takes over and overpowers the parasympathetic nervous system for a bit. This is called a state of hyperarousal. It's not a sexual term. Hyperarousal is just your nervous system is extra sensitive and extra vigilant, picking up on any slight stimulus or piece of information in your surroundings. So it's your body is mobilizing you to face the threat, whether that's by moving towards the threat or moving away from it. And some of my clients, when I first meet with them, are like, well, I don't, I'm not an angry person and I don't like walk away from arguments. So I don't know if I ever really experience fight or flight. But most of us internalize the fight or flight response because we're adults, we've been socialized, we know what's appropriate and not appropriate to do in situations where there are others involved. So we don't start punching the person who's next to us. We don't run away and never come back. Most of us, it's internalized feelings and sensations like rage, anger, irritation. A lot of women who are like, I don't feel anger, but they do feel irritation. They do get annoyed by, hairpin pet peeves, really, really annoyed. And that can be very almost distressing in and of itself. Frustration, panic, fear, anxiety, worry, and concern. When I'm getting into fight or flight, I feel like I'm falling almost, like it's almost like someone has ripped the carpet out from underneath me. And that's when I can start to feel my heart beating, feeling like even a little bit off kilter for a moment. And you can see again in the right hand side what's happening in the body to support this state. Our sympathetic nervous system is telling our blood pressure to go up, our heart rate to go up, to pump whatever's in our intestines into our bloodstream so that we have energy to run with if that's what we need to do. Our adrenaline is going up. Pupil size may go up. My dog, when he's really getting excited or when he's barking his head off at a squirrel or something, it's so funny because his pupils, he looks like he's stoned or something. His pupils are just as big as his eyes. That can happen in human beings too. What's decreasing are things like digestion, salivation, your ability to have like sort of relational awareness of how your actions may impact others. You may have like a decreased inhibition where you're more likely to be volatile or do something you wouldn't normally do in other social situations. And your immune response goes down. And all of this is because your body is taking all of the resources and putting them where they're absolutely necessary to face the threat. And so other systems kind of go offline for a while. Another system that sort of goes offline once we exit the green is the prefrontal cortex. And that's the part of your brain that is associated with executive functioning and making rational decisions and well thought out decisions. And so you may suddenly feel like you can't make decisions or you can't think about things in a sequential order that makes sense. You can't make plans. You feel less like rational control over your feelings. Your feelings just feel like tidal waves and they're coming out of nowhere. That's because your prefrontal cortex is kind of quieting down while you're sort of they used to call it reptile brain, but like the more elemental basic part of your brain is reacting. All right, and so this is not a sustainable state to be in. It takes, if you imagine, things like blood pressure, elevated heart rate, that takes a lot of energy for your body to sustain. And so eventually you may find that you tip into the red. I think that when I asked about to what your body feels like when you're imagining the place that causes discomfort, I remember someone's response was like they feel overwhelmed or like shut down a little bit when they imagine that place. That's sort of a key indicator of more of this red space. The red is where, okay, so the sympathetic nervous system was in control, and now the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that's about relaxing and calming down, is like, I gotta beat this thing. And so it almost overcompensates and gets the upper hand and shuts down the sympathetic nervous system. And so you actually become like too calm, um, to the point where uh, you may be like, for me, I'm definitely more of a red person. That's kind of where I go when I face stressors. Um, it's not uncommon. I'll be feeling fine, then I get an email that is stressful, or like an email from a person who tends to be sort of stressful. I don't know if they're actually going to be stressful today, but just seeing their name in my inbox, I'll suddenly start yawning and feel like exhausted, like, oh my gosh, I need to take a nap in the middle of the workday. Um, because it's like the least bit of trigger puts me into the red. And this is where you might feel things like helpless. You might feel numb, even physically numb, where you can endure a degree of pain that would normally be uncomfortable for you. You might feel depressed. You might feel like you slow down, like the way that you talk actually slows down, or you may not even be able to really put words together, really be an active part of a conversation. You may dissociate, and this is where, again, I think we have like Hollywood pictures of what dissociation is. It's a spectrum. Basically, what's happening is you are compartmentalizing your awareness, and so you're tuning out of whatever it is that is intolerable for you, and your mind is kind of going to this fuzzy, insulated place. On the extreme end, it's like almost a catatonic state where you truly are not aware of what's going on around you, and you're not moving, you're not making eye contact, that kind of thing. Um, that's very rare, um, but it can also just look like a kind of absence, or like a vacant look, or it can feel, when you're experiencing it can feel like everything is far away. You know it's not, and optically it doesn't, it's not like it physically looks far away, but the way you're experiencing it almost feels like you're looking through the far side of the binoculars. Um, sounds you may not be able to hear, or make sense of words in the same way. You may just feel tuned out. You may feel like you're on autopilot and you can't. I mean, we all go into autopilot, and like when we're driving, and that, I'm not saying that that's necessarily um, traumatic dissociation, but you may feel on auto, like you're on autopilot, and no matter how much you try, you can't bring yourself into a more aware state of being. Dissociation is not always unhealthy. We have to dissociate all the time. When I write, when I'm working on my books and I'm writing, I'm dissociating because I'm compartmentalizing my awareness to focus on a creative task, and I'm tuning out the dog bugging me, the sound of like the AC from distracting me. I'm tuning a lot out. I'm tuning out my thoughts about other things so that I can focus on the creative task. So we dissociate all the time. It's not always unhealthy, but where it becomes problematic is where this is kind of an involuntary place our mind goes to when exposed to stress. Signs of the red are also things like extreme shame, a feeling of shutting down, and inability to cope, overwhelm, flooding, if you've heard that term, kind of emotional flooding, hopelessness, preparation for death. And that 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 can look and feel a little bit like suicidal thoughts, um, of the variety where they kind of pop up spontaneously because you can't think of any better solution. Not that you actually are suicidal, but just, well, I might as well. What's even the point? And you feel trapped, physically, emotionally. That feeling of trap can happen in a few different ways. Um, Janet asks, would shock, such as after a sudden loss or traumatic event, be the parasympathetic nervous system working to protect itself? Uh, uh, well, the parasympathetic nervous system definitely is at work there, but shock is actually, a shock can be a few different things, and like true shock is actually a medical emergency, but I'm not actually sure what's happening there from a medical standpoint because I've never studied that. But there are definitely times in life where our parasympathetic nervous system takes over to uh, to kind of force a shutdown, right? When we just absolutely can't take it anymore. It's like a forced shutdown, forced like turning off of the computer, um, so that we can rest or stop moving or stop thinking, and stressing ourselves out. Sarah asks, what is the difference between dorsal vagal and ventral vagal? Well, ventral vagal is the part of the vagus nerve that goes alongside our heart. And when that part is engaged, we are more likely to be able to experience and access the feelings in the green zone. And this red zone is known as the dorsal vagal state. It corresponds to the part of the nerve, the polyvagal nerve that runs alongside the stomach or the gut. And um, when that part of that deeper part of the parasympathetic nervous system is engaged, we're more likely to experience this state of, that's characterized by these symptoms in the red. One way to sort of like litmus test, to kind of distinguish between what the yellow feels like versus what the red is often in the yellow, we have an I can or I must energy. I've got to fix this. I've got to, perfectionize this. I've got to, often if we're like going around our house and we're stressed, we're stress cleaning. It's like I can clean everything. I can make my life perfect by cleaning. Whereas the red is more of I can't. I'm overwhelmed. I have to lay down. I have to stare at the wall. I have to not talk to anybody. I have to insulate myself from anything more happening. I can't let anything else in. So that's a little bit of an intro to what's happening with what goes on in the body with the polyvagal nerve. And so what I tell my clients is just to use this as kind of a map, um, to map where they are at any given moment. And I think that this is helpful because a lot of times, and we can do this even if we're not capital T trauma survivors, because these are just stress states. They become more extreme and more sensitive once we've been through trauma, and maybe more dysregulated once we've been through trauma. But we all experience shades of these states every day. And so we can use this and ask ourselves from time to time, where am I on this map? And what I like to encourage people to do is don't just be like, oh, I'm in the yellow, and then leave it at that. Try and pinpoint, where exactly in the yellow am I? What was I having, like a very green moment and I sort of just a little bit tipped into the yellow? Or have I been in the yellow all day and I'm like gasket ready to pop and I'm about to hit my overwhelm? So where are you? Or was I overwhelmed and flooding before, and now I'm sort of I'm sort of on the way back to green, but not quite there. I'm still a little on edge. So asking yourself, where exactly on this line are you? And then the next question you can ask yourself is, how do you know? What's your body telling you that makes you know that that's where it's at, that that's where you are at? What are the feelings? What are the words that stand out to you? I feel depressed. I feel numb. Um, I feel like I can't do anything. Um, I feel like I can't laugh. I can't smile. Or maybe, I feel energized. Feel energized. I feel ready to step into the ring, fight off a tiger, clean the house. I feel angry. I feel like I want to throttle somebody. I'm sweating. My heart's pounding. Um, which maybe you've had too much coffee. I don't know, but maybe you're in the yellow. Um, or if you're green, how do you know you're in the green? What are the cues for you? It maybe these aren't the words necessarily that speak to you, but if you kind of turn inward, you might find other words that help you understand where you are and and then from there, what you need to be able to bring yourself into the green from other stress states. So that's an exercise you guys can do. Um, I want to talk about one more thing. So from the standpoint of trauma, I said all of us go through versions of these stress states in our day-to-day lives. From the vantage point of trauma, one of the things that can bring us in and out of these states are triggers. So everything may be fine around us, but maybe someone gives us a facial expression that reminds us of something. And I actually had this happen recently, and it was kind of embarrassing. I was with I was having breakfast with a friend, and it was fine, like totally, I think it was a Saturday morning or something, and we were having breakfast at my favorite diner. I was well fed, I was enjoying myself, and we were having a conversation, and it was like very noisy. And the person that I was with um was kind of getting annoyed by like there was a baby screaming really loud, and the person like sort of I was trying to explain something, and because of the baby screaming, the person sort of for like a split second rolled their eyes at like that, and it felt like they were rolling their eyes at me, even though I knew that wasn't the case. But I couldn't. It was like, for whatever reason in that moment, there was a crack in my armor, and the facial expression came in, and probably within about 30 seconds I was just crying, like really, really crying. And then I sort of explained, like, I saw you roll your eyes, and that's like kind of a trigger for me. And like we just talked about it, and it was fine. um they understood, they were very understanding. And we were able to talk about like what was making the environment uncomfortable for them, like the noise and um, other things that they were reacting to. So it was totally fine until the waitress came up to me and asked if everything was okay, and thought that it was some kind of emotional crisis, asked if she could pray for me, which is very sweet, but it was a lot that was like definitely one of those instances where I just needed to like have some space, have some slowness, and kind of get myself back into the green. But anyway, so these little tiny triggers can bring us into one of these states, and as can this is where it gets confusing. The feeling of being in these states can also themselves be a trigger. So maybe we had a trauma experience, where we, in that moment, really went to an extreme version of fight or flight, and our heart was racing, and our breath was shallow, and we had to fight someone off, or whatever it was. In the future, when we're going through these states in a healthy way, in response to normal stressors, maybe when we go into fight or flight, uh, that reminds our body of that one time we had to fight that person. And so, on sort of a body level, the feeling of having an elevated heart rate, of sweating, of um, having a higher, blood pressure, etc., that in and of itself can sometimes be a little triggering. This is why sometimes, when you read articles about mental health and stuff, everyone's like, well, exercise is like the best thing for mental health and you just have to exercise. That's true. I mean, there are actual studies that indicate that for things like depression and stuff. You've got to be careful when it comes to trauma, because things like cardio activity can mimic the feeling of being in fight or flight. And that I've known plenty of people who once their heart rate, if they're working out, once their heart rate gets above a certain point, it becomes very psychologically stressful for them, even if they're in perfect physical shape. So, finding other modes of exercise like yoga or walking or things, and building up a tolerance. If you do end up wanting to do cardio, kind of building up a tolerance where you can enter that higher, like more heart rate activity without it becoming distressing. So triggers kind of send you up, and glimmers help bring you down into the green. What are glimmers? Glimmers are the opposite of triggers. Glimmers are small micro moments of green. And I say micro moments, they can be split seconds sometimes, and they can be very subtle, not intense at all, but just small, subtle moments where you are aware of beauty, where you feel connected, you feel safe, you feel settled, you feel curious. Sometimes I'll be having a really stressful day and I'll turn to my dog, and it's like just that moment of eye contact with my dog before he goes and runs off and does something naughty, um, is like a little glimmer. I just feel a sudden, like, little connection with something else besides myself and my stress. Um, when we're recovering from trauma, a lot of times the tendency is we want to like make a list of all our triggers and avoid them so that we don't have to feel those feelings. That can become, in the end, very counterproductive, because that's a way of giving triggers power. And that's almost a way of sending a signal to ourselves that, yeah, that trigger is so dangerous, we have to avoid it. And we have to be even more afraid and cautious about it. So what I often try to do first with people is, let's set the triggers aside. They're going to be there for a while. And let's instead try to work on glimmers. Let's try to notice or become aware of little glimmers throughout our day. They're not going to be life-changing. They're not going to be all amazing and warm and fuzzy. You're not going to hear angels sing. These are small micro moments of compassion, curiosity, calm, relationship, warmth, safety. And as small as they are, just being aware of them and noticing them and then letting them pass. They don't have to stick around forever. The more we become aware of glimmers, the more we actually build a capacity to experience them. We tell our body, look, there are safe places in the world. Look, there are safe moments. Look, there are moments of connection. You can have a connection with a houseplant. There are things that I feel connected to. And so then our nervous system is like, oh, okay, maybe I can let a little bit more of the world in. So that's one thing that you can do in your life to sort of build up some regulation. Now, what do we do with all this information? Because it's a lot. I want to, if this has spoken to you and you're like, oh, wow, I see a lot of myself in this, whether it's from trauma or whether it's just from chronic stress, I highly recommend, this is a new book by Deb Dana. I used to have to recommend another book by her that was really only for professionals, and it wasn't super helpful for like the everyday person struggling with this stuff. But now she's written a book for everybody, and it's called Anchored: How to Befriend Your Nervous System Using Polyvagal Theory. I highly recommend it. There's a lot of practical exercises in there that you can begin to build up regulation and build up capacity for staying and re-entering the green. Um, it's great for trauma survivors. It's also great for just all of us because we all are kind of facing some element of chronic stress in our modern lifestyle. I have some other um, sort of bullet points here that I don't want to go through all of these because of time. I really want to shift into the second, um, the actual presentation for the session. But I think just to sum those bullet points up, I think the first thing we do with this information is just maybe making an intention to map ourselves. So to take that diagram and remember to sort of remember our bodies by asking our bodies, where are we? Where are we right now? How do we know what's happening in my body to indicate to me that this is where I am? And if you find that for yourself, you're consistently coming up with the answer, I don't know where I am. That's something you pay attention to. Interesting that I don't know where I am. It's interesting that I can't clearly hear what my body is telling me about what it's feeling. And just let that be for a while. And I think the more, what you don't want to do is try and force your body to come up with an answer, or force your mind to like recognize something in your body. That's just a form of almost internal pressure or coercion. Just stay in that place of not knowing for a while. And the more you sort of come back to that place of trying to be aware, the more your body might start to whisper a little bit of where it's at. I'm feeling a little uncomfortable. I'm feeling a little on edge. And once once it starts to whisper to you, you just pay attention and the whisper will grow a little bit louder over time. So Father Leonard has just suggested, and I think that's a good idea, that maybe before just segueing into the next leg of this presentation, we'll maybe pause for 5 minutes. Maybe there's some questions. Maybe people want to get up and stretch, that type of thing. The next leg of the presentation, we're going to turn towards orthodoxy and we're going to do some reflection on how we can start to evaluate how this all fits with our Orthodox faith. That's what we'll be talking about. But for the next 5 minutes or so, if there are questions or comments, we can open it up to that. I think I make sense. Request to put the slide back up from the end. In a second. Since I'm not seeing any questions from others, let me ask a question. If you were to map yourself green, yellow, or red, where would you be right now? You can just, if you want, you can drop it in the chat. If you want to just keep your answer to yourself, that's fine too. I'll go back to the low yellow, green. not sure where I'm probably some version of yellow simply because I'm giving a talk and my adrenaline's working, and that's an example of a healthy, it's healthy to be in fight or flight when you're doing something like giving a talk. If I were not nervous at all, I might be a sociopath. Sarah's in a nurturing green environment right now. That's great. Lemongrass yellow. Very nice gradation there. Matthew says, I think I spend a lot of time in the red. I'm with you, Matthew. That's my sort of dominant, it's like the dominant way my body responds to stress. Whoops, Cheryl, sorry. Not Matthew, Cheryl. Natalie comments, I think that we all have Mr. W experiences. I just didn't know what to do with them. I agree. I think we all have Mr. W experiences. And that's part of why I shared that, is even as distressing as that is to me, I think it's like, and unique as that particular memory is, I think it's the variety that many of us have experienced and can probably relate to. Georgina says she's in the yellow today, but more often in the red. Sarah asks, what are VVC, SNS, DVC? That is, I'm not sure where you're seeing. Oh, I see that at the bottom. I think it's, so VV is ventral vagal, and I think maybe the C is complex. VVC is dominant. When the ventral vagal complex or part of the polyvagal nerve is dominant, the sympathetic nervous system and dorsal vagal complex are in transient blends, which promote healthy physiological functioning, meaning that they're active and doing what they're supposed to, and cooperating with one another in a way that promotes healthy physiology. That's right down here for anyone who wonders what I was talking about. Natalie asks, are some people so damaged they just live in dissociation all the time? I'm going to replace the word damaged with wounded, because damaged can feel a little, I know that's not where you were coming from, Natalie, but damaged can feel a little shamey. So maybe are some people so wounded that they just live in dissociation all the time? Yeah, I would say gradations of it. Especially, it's not necessarily even that they're just so wounded. It may be the environment that they're in currently. So, when I first start seeing a client, when I'm doing a consultation with them, I ask how safe they feel in their life right now, or if they're currently experiencing things like abuse. Because you can't, I don't want to say you can't, but it's a very different when you're trying to work on trauma responses if you are still in a traumatic environment, like an abusive marriage. Abuse, active abuse, an actively abusive environment is definitely one of those environments where you might find someone who is sort of chronically dissociated. And if you've ever met someone like that, it's just so heartbreaking, because they may seem almost like a shell of themselves. Like maybe you remember them before the marriage, before they got married to this person, and they were full of life. They were, vibrant, had hobbies, had opinions. And then suddenly over time, that just becomes so eroded where when you talk to them, it just feels like they're so far away and so hollow. And one reason for that is they may be sort of in some form of really long long-lasting dissociation, because that's the only way they can function and survive in the environment that they're living. And that's an example where you don't want to force someone to dismantle that coping mechanism, because that is serving a purpose. It's obviously not healthy to be dissociated like that all the time, but that's what their mind needs to do just to stay alive and intact. You don't invite people to start dismantling mechanisms like that until they're in a safe place. And once people are in a safe place with safe relationships, safe connections, freedom, their minds will start to dismantle some of those coping mechanisms naturally and gradually in a way that they can process. So Georgina says, in rethinking, today I am in the green. I think Georgina said before you were like kind of in the yellow. Yeah, you. So Georgina, I'm interested to hear what made you reconsider where you're at. And feel free to private message me if you'd like. You don't have to share with everybody, but I'm interested in that shift for you. Like what made you reconsider where you're at?
I think I was looking at more from the MS perspective rather than the present. And when I reviewed or rethought the present situation, I can see the green. Like I have, like I've mentioned before, I have multiple sclerosis. So I'm kind of living in the yellow from day to day. But for today, in this talk, which is I'm finding very enlightening, I'm in the green. Definitely in the green. Because I'm curious. I'm open to what I'm hearing. I'm in the present. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, that's right. I saw your comment really early on about the chronic illness, and I'm sorry I didn't address that. I was thinking about too many things at once. But thank you for mentioning that, and that's such a beautiful Peter says, so this talk is a glimmer. Peter gets an A for today. But Georgina, thank you for bringing up like the way you put it. It's so true. A lot of times our minds are hyper vigilant, ready for a threat, ready for something unseen to come at us. So we're kind of always bracing ourselves. And when we maybe do a double take and look at where we're actually at in this moment, do we have what we need in this moment? Maybe even a little bit more than what we need in this moment. We realize, oh, we are safe. We are connected. We do have what we need for now. Someone has asked privately, thank you for sharing. Oh, wait, someone has asked privately, is chronic fatigue and needing things to move slowly being in the red zone? So chronic fatigue syndrome is its own thing. I do know that trauma and adverse childhood experiences and chronic stress can impact and activate chronic fatigue syndrome, but there's more to chronic fatigue syndrome, if you're talking about the actual syndrome, neurologically than just feeling tired all the time. So just mention that. But if you're just talking about being tired all the time and needing things to move slowly, she's asking, or he, is that a sign that you're in the red zone? It could be. It could be. There could also be more going on. This is where seeing a doctor is helpful if you're tired all the time. I'm someone who struggles with fatigue and I'm easily overwhelmed with stimulation, sounds, sensations, stressors. I'm easily overwhelmed. And it's frustrating because I always feel like I've got to lay down or take a nap to cope with everyday life. But I go to the doctor periodically and make sure it's not something else, make sure I'm not anemic and all of that. And sometimes it's just I realize I am very prone to the red. And sometimes what I need to do is wait to don't wait until I'm exhausted to take a nap. Lay down for 10 minutes. Like I'll sometimes just go and lay down for 10 minutes, even if I'm not feeling tired. If I know the afternoon is coming, I've done a lot this morning. And if I don't just take a breather, I'm going to get overwhelmed. So not waiting until I'm exhausted and trying to manage the amount of information and stress that's coming at me. Because I know I can't handle it. And so I have to set boundaries. I have to sometimes even setting boundaries with myself. Not watching things or listening to things that are going to stress me out. Setting boundaries with other people when necessary. Because I know I cannot handle as much as other people, and that's okay. All right. So I am going to shift here. Thank you for all of these questions. Oh gosh, we have more questions in the chat. Linda, I'm gonna challenge you to make your question one of the points that you reflect on as we move to this next. This next part is going to be some reflection and sharing for all of us, not just me answering questions. So Linda, if this is something that's close to your heart, I maybe use that as a point of reflection and see what comes to mind and maybe share insights that come to mind with us, sorry. All right. Let me pull up the next little topic here. Father Leonard, we have an hour left, is that correct?
Yep. Or, there's nothing that's going to stop us from overtime if you like, but
I have a hard cutoff. So I'm going camping.
Oh,
and I have a ride coming for me.
God bless you. Yes. And just enjoy yourself.
Yeah. I hope it's a time of green for me and not a time of yellow or red. All right. Hang on a second. Let me share my screen. All right. So what I would like to do, as I've been saying, this is kind of the part of the retreat where I want to challenge us all to take what we've been thinking about and apply it to orthodoxy, or rather apply orthodoxy to what we've been thinking about. There's a few ways I could do this. And one of them is I could just continue to talk for another hour. But I am a coach. And so what I'm trying when I'm with clients, what I'm always trying to do is help people become their own coaches, help people become their own to generate their own reflection and creativity towards their lives. So instead of just continuing to talk, I'm going to put the ball in all of our courts and we're going to do a little bit of a SWOT analysis of what the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are for us as Orthodox Christians when it comes to the presence of trauma in our world. And that may be our own, how we approach our own traumas personally. It may be how we show up for others, how we minister to others. If we're on parish councils or we're active in our parish ministries or we're a clergy member, it may also be how we structure our programs at church, what we do in our ministries, how we train people to minister in our parishes. So first, I'd like you to, each of you, maybe identify 2 points of reflection or analysis. And I have here a list of yourself, relationships with those you love or minister to, Orthodox practices and traditions in general, and also Orthodox practices at the parish level. So pick 1 or 2 of those areas that you want to really reflect on and concentrate on. And I'm going to walk us through 4 sets of questions around the themes of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. If you've done a SWOT analysis before, this is familiar to you. If you've never done a SWOT analysis before, that's fine. I have a lot of sort of thought starter questions around each of these 4 themes to kind of get you started. So each of these 4, we'll just spend some time with the questions. If you want to reflect through writing, this is a good time to go grab a piece of paper or a journal. If you want to reflect through thinking and staring off into space, you are welcome to do so. If you're someone who wants to reflect through typing into the chat or sharing a few observations verbally with others, you're welcome to do that as well. I do ask that, we try and, if we're going to share things that will be constructive and edifying to those around us. And I would ask that we avoid sharing specific details about traumas we may have experienced and identifying information about people or parishes. Just because, we want to make sure that everybody here is safe and able to process what's being shared. So with that said, we're going to turn to this first area of reflection, which is namely strengths. So we're going to start with the positive. And for 5 to 7 minutes, here are some questions that you may want to reflect on. Again, bearing in mind the specific point of analysis you want to reflect on, whether it's yourself, other people around you, parish or community practices. How has Orthodoxy helped you or those around you heal from your own woundedness? What Orthodox practices or beliefs seem important or life-giving in the face of trauma? And there are no right or wrong answers here. What do you think Orthodoxy, your parish, you yourself, or your family do well when it comes to ministering to the walking wounded? What resources, insights, or assets does Orthodoxy have to offer the presence of trauma in our world? How do we think about or live out these strengths in a way that is humble and life-giving? So we're just going to spend a few minutes reflecting. You can put whatever you want for now in the chat, but if you're going to share verbally, let's just give it at least 3 or 4 minutes of silence to give everyone a chance to reflect, and then I'll let you know when it's time if you want to share verbally. And obviously, if you have any questions, just reach out in the chat. I'll be watching. So at this point, if you'd like to share with others in chat or verbally, anything that comes to mind, I invite you to do that for a few minutes before we move to the next theme of reflection. I'll say for myself that one thing from the very beginning of my journey into Orthodoxy, and one of the reasons that really prompted me to become Orthodox, is the fact that our tradition has room for suffering, and suffering is a part of our story. It's not an expression of Christianity where you're sort of expected to get over suffering by praying hard enough. We are comfortable spending time with the cross and allowing suffering to be part of the story. We've got a lot of great thoughts in chat as well. Sarah says, Orthodoxy puts primary focus on healing and connecting with God. The church is seen as a hospital and not a courtroom, along with confession, which requires reflection and articulation of disconnects. And another human, a priest, the triage, where to turn your focus and what to put aside for now. That's really beautifully put. We're going to move to the next theme. And that is weaknesses. I think it's important when we're thinking about ourselves, our faith, how we work as a church, that we're humble, that we're self-aware. It's okay to have weaknesses and areas of improvement. So here are some thought starter questions to get you started as you reflect around weaknesses. In your experience or opinion, what are some of the ways Orthodoxy, as it is commonly practiced in North America, falls short of ministering to those with life wounds like trauma? How does your own personal expression of Orthodoxy perhaps fall short in a way that is not healing for you or for those around you? And this one I just put a note, this is maybe better saved for confession, depending on what it is. So don't feel like you've got to respond to this one publicly or something. Where do we as Orthodox individuals and communities miss the mark when it comes to responding to trauma in our world? Who could we learn from? What resources for learning and growing do we have in our communities or the world at large? At this point, if you'd like to share some thoughts with others, again, in the chat or verbally, feel free to do so. We've got some good thoughts and reflections in the chat. I'll just read a few so they can be on the record in the recording. One person writes, I have been told in the past by a priest or two that feelings are to be ignored or not taken seriously. I think they were in reaction to the emotionalistic, charismatic evangelicalism that they either left behind or were helping others to leave behind. But I think it led people to make bad decisions because they weren't listening to their true experience. Yeah. Yeah, we can kind of get to a place where we discount human emotion. Even though emotions can be a really important part of understanding reality, understanding our tendencies, understanding why it is that maybe we have certain weaknesses. Another person writes, priests who come from healthy families of origin and healthy marriages can sometimes be at a disadvantage or even clueless addressing trauma and dysfunctional relationships. Father Leonard writes that it's good to be reminded of our weaknesses when it leads to healing and repentance. Yeah, that's a good point. Not so helpful to just focus on weaknesses for their own sake or for the sake of just beating ourselves up and then not doing anything about it, or losing sight of Christ when we dwell on our weaknesses. Natalie writes, many of our communities are not very diverse and are not always welcoming to other races or outsiders. Georgina says, since becoming disabled and during the pandemic, social isolation can be overwhelming. One priest and 3 individuals kept in touch by phone, and when restrictions lifted, they visited. Which is not a lot. Better than nothing, but maybe we fall short sometimes in ministering to the needs of those who are homebound, those who have different abilities and are not able to participate as regularly in person at church. So those are some of the thoughts in the chat. I'm going to move us to the next point of reflection, opportunities. And I think it's important that we remember that how many opportunities we are given by God. Opportunities don't come about by our own making or our own entitlement. They're gifts from God. And God also gives us resources to move towards opportunities. And so I hope these questions can maybe help you think about what opportunities there might be, given some of the information you've learned about trauma this weekend. So, what more are we as individuals or as parish communities capable of in responding to the woundedness in our world? What is one small way you could put into practice something you learned this weekend? What needs around trauma are growing or intensifying in ourselves, in our world, in our communities? We tend to see, needs as chores that we've got to do or ignore. But actually needs are often opportunities. So it's a way of realizing, hey, this is a little bit of a signal that we may have something to give here, or something is being asked of us. Another question, how could we practice our faith in a way that more fully expresses the spirit of both our faith and our need for healing? What ideas or new insights does the information we learned this weekend spark for you? How could we, with God's help, of course, do a better job supporting the healing of trauma survivors in our homes, parishes, or local communities? And so I invite you to reflect on these for a few minutes, sharing whatever comes to mind in the chat. I'm back and I'm catching up on your guys' reflections in the comments. Sounds like some of you have really appreciated the Klimmer context, the importance of safety and connection, and thinking about how we can foster more safety and connection in our parish community. The analogy of the scar and God's healing from last night when I talked about St. Macrina's scar and our own scars. All right, we're going to move now to threats. This is where we think about, what isn't currently a problem, but could be. Things we want to be vigilant for, things we want to be humble about, things we want to ask God for his guidance and wisdom about. So here are some thought starter questions. What do we need to be vigilant of as Orthodox people in our understanding of and approach to the world of trauma? What are the kinds of mistakes we might be prone to as Orthodox people, or just as human beings, when we're trying to minister to or show up in the world? What are the ways in which we ourselves are vulnerable or become more vulnerable when it comes to trauma and recovery? What new threats or risks might arise as we implement some of the knowledge that we learned this week? Not saying we have to be afraid of threats, but part of wisdom is knowing what the risks are. What are the costs of putting new things into practice or thinking about things in a new way? Okay, so we've spent some time reflecting on threats. There are some thoughts and conversations happening in the comments. Sarah, I see your question about sitting with someone. I think you also asked that in the last session. I didn't get to address it. So, whoopsies. I trust that, we're all in different places, and I hope that some of these reflections have given you a starting point to maybe apply some of what you've learned this weekend to your own specific context, struggles, like insights, communities, etc. And I thank you for sharing your insights with others and with me in the comments. At this point, we have a half hour left and we have some choices, and I'd like to hear from you guys what you would most appreciate. Would you like to spend a half hour just in discussion, Q&A? There have been a number of questions that I haven't been able to get to yet. Or would you like to hear me talk some more and reflect on what for me has been some of the strengths of the Orthodox tradition? That's an actual question.
Nicole, I think we can bring you back next week to answer that stuff.
Sorry?
I think we'd like to have you back next Saturday to answer all those things after your
Oh.
camping trip. I'm being a little bit silly, but not quite.
Not sure I'm able to next Saturday, but
We'll find you again.
okay.
This has been so awesome and rich and full. But my gut's telling me that probably Q&A would be better rather than more information.
Okay. Yeah, that's my sense too. Even though we've I'll put a link where you can hear some more of my reflections if that's really what you were wanting. But for now, let's do some Q&A. Natalie, no, the chat probably won't be available in the recording, although Father Leonard, maybe you can make the chat available for people who
Yep,
attended.
that's doable. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, because usually the chat doesn't show up when you get the recording. Sorry, I'm snacking a little bit. I didn't actually eat lunch between the sessions because I can't eat when I'm giving talks. There was a question from Sarah that it's not showing up for me. Sarah, your question about sitting with Zoom. Sarah says, I need to be and feel better equipped to sit with someone, as well as respect the pace, route, and idiosyncratic nature of the other person's journey. And you also, Sarah, I believe, had a question last session about how, what are some strategies or practices to sort of help us sit with others. And I'd like to address that. And she says, maybe elaborate on ways to sit with someone without problem solving. Yes. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing. How do we sit with others? Well, I think that maybe where we start is learning, first of all, to sit with ourselves and thinking about what is it that you personally find challenging when you're having to sit with others, or when other people's healing is not happening the way you think it should, or as fast as it should, or as easily as it should. So what is that bringing up for you specifically? Maybe it's feelings of frustration, impatience, powerlessness, maybe confusion. You're not really sure what the person needs. Sarah says for her, it brings up incompetence. And I'm sure, and not Sarah, that you have to answer this, but with feelings of incompetence, I'd maybe challenge myself to peer even deeper under the hood. Why is incompetence uncomfortable for you? Does it make you feel ashamed? Does it make you feel like you should be more competent? What what is that and what will happen? And I challenge you to kind of take these questions and reflect on them after the session, because they're the kinds of questions that we need to spend a little time with. But what would happen if you were in a situation where you were incompetent? So she says, I just want to help, and usually being practical is the only MO I have. Which I can relate to. I'm gonna still challenge you to just spend some time with those questions after the session, because I'm encouraging you to spend some time with them, and you're giving responses, which is fine, and I get. But if you're rapid fire responding, you're not actually sitting with these questions. So this is like a little lesson right here. So learning to sit with whatever the deeper feelings, fears are. Why do we feel like we need to be practical and solve the problem? And that's going to be a slightly different answer for each of us. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. There's no universal answer. So learning to sit with those uncomfortable questions within ourselves. And also learning to sit with our own pain with regard to our own life experiences. We have to do that first of all with ourselves. Then and like develop that as kind of a practice. So where in our lives do we avoid difficult feelings? Where in our lives do we rush past the scars? Do we rush past our own scars unnoticed, to use the words of Saint Macrina's fellow nun that I mentioned yesterday? Beginning to pay more attention to that in ourselves will help us kind of develop our sitting with muscles, our ability to stay in the pain and stay in the discomfort and the ambiguity of stuff not getting resolved right away. And it will also help us to realize that the wounds are not the problem. The wounds in themselves are not the problem. They're not the threat. What is the threat is our discomfort and our feelings of fear with regard to the wounds. All of that is very theoretical, so let's kind of boil that down to some practical ideas with regards to others. We can practice. We do not have to be experts right away. We can practice. One thing that I know about myself is it helps to have something to squeeze. It helps to have something to fidget with when I'm in a conversation with someone else where I know it is probably going to be useful for me to slow down, slow my thoughts down, slow my responses down, leave longer pauses. And so if I have something to fidget with, whether it's a zipper, a prayer rope, my own gall-darn fingers, just to fidget with and let my anxiety go out through my body instead of out my mouth. And when people are talking or when they're silent, asking myself, what must that be like for them? So not just paying attention to their words and what they're saying cognitively, but imagining what that must feel like on an internal level for them, and allowing my imagination to just enter into that reality with them, which is a very creative exercise. Having some stock questions ready, open-ended questions, not questions where you sort of secretly feel like you think you know what they should answer. So you're going to ask the question in such a way that makes them give the answer you're wanting, but just open-ended questions. Tell me more. What does that feel like for you? How does your body feel as you're telling me this? Really open-ended questions. What do you need right now? What would be helpful for you to receive in this moment? That you're not committing to offering that. You're just asking the person, what theoretically would be helpful for you to receive in this moment. But more than that, just being comfortable with silence. Learning to be really, really, really comfortable with silence, which takes a lot of time to practice. Sometimes if I'm really struggling to just be in listening mode with somebody, I say that. Gosh, what you're saying right now is makes me feel really powerless, that I should have words to offer you and I don't. And I just want to acknowledge that and get that off my chest, because I really want to be here for you. Natalie asks a question. How do we respond when someone tells us that their child is bisexual or gay or etc., fill in the blank, and they have grown up Orthodox? I know we still love them and accept them, but I don't want to say something unhelpful. Is this a sit with them situation? I want to be supportive in a correct way. Yes, I would say that is probably almost definitely a sit with them situation. You're not a priest. It's not a confession. It's not a therapy session. You're not God. The situation is way bigger than anything you could say or do. And it's not when someone comes to you with that kind of with those kinds of questions, whether they're the ones that are questioning their sexual identity or their children or relative or something, that is something you bear witness to, and just bear witness to the feelings that are there, the questions that are there, the isolation that can be such an isolating, fearful place for people to be in, because they're so fearful of shame and judgment, that it's okay to say, I don't have the answers here, but I am not afraid to sit with you. I'm not afraid to hear you. And I'm not afraid to see that you're in this situation. I'm not afraid to be in this situation with you. One thing that, this is something I continuously have to remind myself of and ask God to remind me of at critical moments. I see a lot of my clients come to me because they've experienced forms of spiritual abuse or coercion in Orthodox contexts or in other Christian contexts prior to their becoming Orthodox. But spoiler alert, spiritual abuse does happen in Orthodoxy. We're not immune to it. So yes, I have clients, who some of them are not able to go to church right now because of the experiences they've had in church. Even a different parish is going to remind them or bring them into situations that are too distressing for them right now because they haven't yet healed. Some of them have run away from God because of the ways they've been treated by priests or by others in positions of spiritual authority. As an Orthodox person, do I want them to be able to come back to church? Yes. Do I want them to be in relationship? Well, let's put it this way. Do I want them to be able to experience and receive the love of God as expressed in the church? Yes. Do I believe that the Orthodox Church is the one true Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church? Yes, I believe all of that. But more, I shouldn't say more than that. All of that rests on free will, on our free will, and our freedom that we are given in God, in Christ. We are granted free will from the very beginning. It gets messed up because we pressure ourselves and we force ourselves and we force others into ways of being that are not free. But really all we are doing as Christians, this is a quote from Callistos Ware when he's talking about the purpose of education. I think it applies to faith in general. All we're doing as Christians is learning how to be free. The whole way we grow in faith, every step we take towards Christ, We're just learning more and more what to do with freedom. So when I have a client who's with me, who's suffered from spiritual abuse, when I have a client who's questioning their sexual identity, or has a child who's questioning their sexual identity, my answer is not, well, here's what the church teaches and here's what you should do. It's helping the person recover their God-given free will. And it's only out of that freedom that that person can make the choice to walk towards Christ or not, or stay where they are. And the way that person exercises their freedom, I may not always agree with, but I truly believe that God can do way more with our honest no, with our honest and freely offered no, than he can with our coerced, forced, people-pleasing yes, fearful yes. So I would never want a client to feel like, I've got to go to church because Nicole, secretly that's what Nicole wants me to do. Or I've got to stop, I've got to stop thinking certain thoughts because that's the right answer. That's what the church says to do. I've got to go to confession, even though I'm terrified of my priest, because the church says I need to go to confession. That is all a violence against our free will. We're not free in those moments. And whereas if we say, no, I am not going to confession right now because I'm terrified of my priest, God can work with that. God can meet us there, and he does meet us there. When I try to impose, like with clients, like I make mistakes as well. And there are times I say things to clients where later on I'm like, I wish I wouldn't have said that. Not that it was damaging or wrong or whatever, but I think my saying that maybe limited their ability to think creatively and freely. When I just let clients be free and find their freedom, the ways God works out their healing always surpasses my imagination. I have, there's a client, well, I can't share that actually, but the creative ways that God speaks to people, the moments he chooses to reveal himself and his love to them, is just like, it brings tears to my eyes. It's so far beyond what I could engineer for that person or want to engineer. So when we're sitting with people, just remember that we want to be practical. We want to be fix-it. We want to be fix-it people. Our ability to engineer things for people is this small. That's the most we can come up with as human beings. God, if we just sit with the person, bear witness to them, hold hope for them, hold them in our prayers, God entering into that person's suffering can do so much more and be so much, reveal so much more love to that person than we ever could. And he will. It takes time for them to wake up. It takes time for them to be able to feel safe enough to receive that love, but he will. So that is kind of a really big answer to some of these things about like what happens when people voice homosexual, that whole issue, when people are struggling with things, we don't know what to do. We just remember it's not about us. We've still got five or so minutes left. If there are any like low-hanging fruit questions. that don't require a 20-minute response. Don't get me talking for 20 minutes.
I will attempt to promise to be a good boy and not make you talk for another 20 minutes.
Is that a question or should I go to the next question?
No, that's just a stupid comment.
Oh, okay. Matt, I believe this is Cheryl, not Matthew, but this person asks, what do you do when someone is sharing their woundedness and it triggers your woundedness? Good question. There's not a one size fits all answer. But first of all, first step is noticing. That can save you from a lot of harm or causing pain to others, because you react out of anger, you react out of something that's not part of the present situation. So noticing is the first thing. And as you grow in your own healing journey, you begin to learn and recognize what you need in certain moments. Sometimes the answer is you need to end the conversation. And you can do that in a polite, loving way. But sometimes that's what's needed, or getting out of the room or the environment that it's in to just regain your equilibrium. Other times it may be slowing down the pace of the conversation. Hey, I'm having trouble processing right now because of my own stuff. Can we go back to this point later? Can you restate what you said? Because I was having trouble processing what you said. And I'd like to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. Sometimes it's just being honest. Hey, this is tough stuff we're talking about. And it's bringing up my own experiences. It's bringing up my own woundedness. And I feel like it's fair that I acknowledge that to you, because I might not really seem like myself suddenly. That's a way that we can just be real with people. If we're in a safe conversation where it's okay to say that with the person. In my coach training, one of the things that we learned, because you can imagine, there are times when I'm talking with clients and they're sharing something that directly relates to something I've gone through. And sometimes the best grounding techniques and all of that, you still get roped in a little bit by the stuff they're sharing. And so one of the things that I learned in coaching is that sometimes it's just helpful to disclose, I've gone through some really similar things. And that means I can understand you. I can understand your pain in a particular way. It also means that this is difficult for me to talk about sometimes. And I'd like you to know that. And checking in with people. How does that make you feel, that knowing that I've gone through something similar? Those are some of those ideas that I have and ways that I navigate those situations. But keep in mind, hurt people. And so there are also times when it's not ideal, it's not a good idea to share our woundedness with others or share our triggers. If the person is unstable or prone to use information against us, we keep that information, we keep our vulnerabilities close to us in those situations. We don't owe people explanations. We don't owe people our life stories or our life pain. So if the person that you're talking with is a bit more toxic, you don't feel like they're maybe the best person to open up with about your own wounds, don't. Trust your gut. So yeah, those are some thoughts I have. I think we're kind of moving towards an end. I want to thank all of you guys and gals for being here. It's always a little interesting being over Zoom. Don't get as much of a, speaking of safety and connection, don't feel as much of a connection to people over Zoom as I would if we were able to have banter and stuff and coffee hours and all of that. But nonetheless, I really have enjoyed your comments. I've enjoyed your hospitality, sharing your ideas. I've enjoyed your questions. And I'm really grateful that we had this opportunity to gather. And if you'd like to stay connected, at the bottom of that resources sheet, which I'll share again, there's all of my coordinates and ways that you can keep up to date on my writing or follow me on social media. So hang on a second. So yeah, and if you are interested in trauma-informed coaching, you can also reach out about that. I don't know if my website's on there. Yes, my coaching page is on there. All the information for that. Father Leonard, anything else that we should say?
Did you have an exit poll you'd like to offer?
Oh, I didn't. I'm sorry, I didn't get
No,
one.
just curious. No big deal. We might send something out by email to everyone. It's just handy to do it now. But in any case, I personally, I really want to thank you so profoundly for being available to us and for offering your wisdom and your knowledge and just your just you. It's been a great time, and I personally enjoyed it a lot, and I've seen a lot of comments in the chat and in people who are texting me personally that it's been very, very well appreciated. So thank you so much. We'll have to do this again. Aside from that, I don't think there's any other real announcements unless somebody knows something that my foggy COVID brain has forgotten. And if I did, please unmute yourself and let me know. I'll leave that open for a second or two here. Other than that, I'd like to close with a quick prayer and just offer God thanks for his grace, for his wisdom, for his kindness, for his love, and for his servant, Nicole. Thank you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Lord, now let your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared before the face of all people, a light to enlighten the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.